Berminski? Mr. Haas?
Here.
Ms. Hauk?
Here.
Mr. Kelleher?
Here.
Mr. Perry?
Here.
Ms. Edmond?
Here.
Mr. Schnee?
Present.
Mr. Urban?
Here.
Mr. Vogt?
Here.
Ms. Wakus?
Present.
Mr. McGinley?
Present.
10 present.
Okay, any additions or deletions to the work session agenda?
Well, yes. I would like to add just a discussion item because I would like to introduce at the next meeting, a requirement to have the monthly budget reports presented at the division level. So we can discuss it now, and we'll have a resolution or something for the next voting session.
Monthly budget reports what?
At the division level.
Monthly budget reports.
I've asked for it many times. I think it's going to take a vote of council to make it happen.
Great. Anyone else? We'll add that at the end. Number 10. Okay, Mr. Azori is here from the Morgan Stanley office, and Mr. Rick Heimer, our pension coordinator, and we'd like to start with them so that they would have the opportunity to depart after they finish up. They won't have to stay with us for the rest of the evening.
Thank you for that.
It's all yours.
Delighted to be here. My name is Rich Hazori, Institutional Consulting Director at Morgan Stanley. We were retained as investment consultant for the pension plan in 2008, actually October of 2008. We were retained through an RFP process in 2011. Fast forward again in 2015. When I look around the room or look around the table, two of you currently serve on the retirement board. Many of you have served on the retirement board. So this will be a refresher, a review, and an introduction for some of you to the work that we're doing on behalf of the 3,000 employees and retirees that are covered by the plan. I want to walk through, and I think there are some questions regarding performance, so if it's okay with you, Mr. McGinley, what I'd like to do is go through performance, take a look at where we've been, maybe talk about where we're going. We have made some changes to assumptions, and I think it's important at this meeting to address those assumptions and give some of the rationale behind why we're making the decisions that we have. So, posted to the website was a document that looks like this. My team and I extracted an executive summary of the investment policy statement that guides the decisions that we make in the portfolio. But I think it's important to note, but it's sometimes overlooked. The reason that we invest, the reason that we have these funds, is to make good on a promise. This county has made a promise to employees and retirees, and our job and our responsibility as fiduciaries on this plan is to make good on that promise and those promises that are made. We use investments, we use the capital markets to invest and try and earn our way to make good on those promises. But again, together, all of us have in the past and all of us are currently doing our best to make good on those promises. Right now, if I take a look at the construct, and all of these numbers and figures are going to be as of the end of May. The portfolio value is just north of $238 million, actually close to $239 million.
Is any of this in some of these printouts?
It is. This will be on tab 2.
Thank you.
If I look at the construct again of the portfolio, it's a $239 million portfolio, of which $115 million, $115.8 million is invested in public equities. $92 million is in fixed income or bonds. $4.7 million in cash. Alternative investments, which includes hedge funds and private equity, we have about $24 to actually $26 million, for again the total of $239 million. If I could ask you to flip to the tab 3, we begin to look at performance and where we've been. Tab 3, page 6. I'll draw your attention. We're going to work our way clockwise through this first page, and then dig into some of the details as we work our way through the presentation. Again, as a refresher, we were retained in October of 2008. If you would all rewind back, it was sort of the heart of the global financial crisis. So we were charged with investment policy, construction, revision, reallocating the portfolio. There were a lot of operational tasks, moving from your prior provider to Morgan Stanley. At that time, $119 million was moved over initially. These numbers are a little deceiving. Again, I'm going to point here to the third column in that first upper left-hand box. There were $119 million moved over initially. That second line of net contributions, what we've taken from inception is money in versus money out, and we're going to go through that on a year-by-year basis. But from the $119 million, there was an additional $41 million moved into the portfolio. Since inception, you have made about $110 million in investment return. That's a net investment return, net of any fee or net of any expense. Again, as of the end of the end of May, the final balance of the portfolio was $239 million. We took a look at last year's time period. You started the second column with $211.5 million. There were contributions of $4.5 million. Last year was an unusual year for the pension plan. Again, we made double payments into the pension. So it was the first year in a long time that there was positive inflows into the pension plan. Net investment return was $24.2 million. We ended 2017 with a balance of $240 million, which is a high point for us in the pension plan. Getting back to the first column, I'll look at the year-to-date numbers. We started the year again with $240 million. We did make the ARC contribution this year. However, we are paying out about $1.2 to $1.3 million consistently on a monthly basis. So as a result of that, cash flows this year are marginally positive. They will be negative by the time we get to the end of the year, probably to the tune of about $6 million. We had an investment loss, or have an investment loss, through the end of May of $1.7 million, again, which brings our balance as of the end of May at $238.9 million. The graph to the right shows the contributions, which are the red line. The blue line is the money that the county has made. The pension has made above and beyond that. Again, it's $110 million. Lower right-hand side is the top holdings. I don't want to get too far into the details. The left graph, which I think puts some of these returns into context, it's a very important graph, shows you the returns that you've earned along the vertical axis and the risk that we've taken in order to generate those returns. The orange dot is the stock market, the all-country world stock index. So what this suggests is that we've taken less risk than the equity markets over time. As a result of that, as we would expect, we've earned less than the equity markets. If you were to draw a line through that orange dot in the upper right-hand corner, if we took more risk than the equity markets, we would expect to be compensated for that risk and get more return. I call the northwest quadrant investment nirvana, which means we've taken less risk than the equity markets, but we've garnered more return. And we affectionately return to that southeast quadrant as the doghouse. I've taken more risk than the equity markets, but I've generated less results or less return as a result of that. We'll take a closer look at risk and some of the statistics in the portfolio in a second. Let's take a look. We could look at different time periods. Again, please ask questions. Happy to go through. We have no formal presentation. Wanted to give you a sense, again, of returns through time. We are approaching a 10-year number through October. Again, we were hired in the beginning of October. But since inception, again, you started with $119 million, net contributions of close to $10 million. That works out to be a 6.21% rate of return. That compares favorably to the global equity markets. It compares favorably to the fixed income markets. It's exactly in line with what we would expect. If you recall, and actually we'll focus on risk at this point. If you recall, we took over in the midst of the global financial crisis. In 2008, prior to us being retained, the pension plan was down about 23%. So we submitted a response to the request for proposal. The plan was about $200 million. By the time the assets were transferred to Morgan Stanley, we had about $150 million. To put that into context, I had a conference call with our actuary over the weekend. The funded status of the plan in 2007 was 94%. After the end of the global financial crisis, it was 60%. So with the help of the retirement board at the time, we decided to make a conscious effort to make money, do our best to very deliberately and very methodically dig our way out of the hole, dig our way out of a 60% funded situation, but also agreed that it was appropriate not to put ourselves in a position where we go from 94% down to 60% ever again. And if you take a look at some of the statistics that we have, and this is going to be on page, actually page 10 of 19 under that tab 3, blows up what we saw on the first page. And when I look at this and when I think about this and I put the performance of the pension plan into context, we've effectively earned about 60% of what the equity markets earned over time since 2008. But at the same time, we did that by taking a third of the volatility that the markets presented to us. To put some real numbers around that, if I look at different time periods and how the markets have performed, this is on page 11 of 19. And I just want to focus on the upper right-hand graph. Not only do we measure returns or raw return numbers, we measure performance. How much risk did we take in order to generate the returns in the portfolio that we did? If I look at the graph in the upper right-hand corner and I work my way up from the bottom to the top, what I'm measuring here is drawdowns. And the market went down, how much did our portfolio go down? So we look at the maximum drawdown, which is the bottom line. The dark blue line is the equity market. The light blue line is our portfolio, it's the pension plan. So in the very worst case scenario, peak to trough, since we've taken over, top to bottom, the market's fallen about 20% in the worst case. Our portfolio has fallen about 7, just north of 7%. The worst 12-month return, if I measure top to bottom how far the market has fallen, it's about 12%, north of 12%. We've fallen almost 7%. Worst 3-month return, 17% drop in the market versus the portfolio 4.5%, 4.6%. And again, the worst 1-month return was markets were down 10%, while the portfolio was down about 4%, just north of 4%. So we say it internally, if the market's going to give it, we're going to get it. But again, I think the most important thing, particularly as we look forward, and we could talk about forward-looking expectations, is to protect you in down markets, to never put us in a position, put us in a position where we're at a, right now 73% funded status. We can't afford to be at 50%. We think about a lot, we talk about a lot in the retirement board meetings, the required contributions to the pension plan. We recognize that it has increased over time. Part of what we're doing is earning our way out of the issues that had occurred in 2008. Part of what we're contending with also is a changing demographic. When we look at the cash flows that are coming out of the plan, it's $1.2 to $1.3 million today, but the reality is the obligation that we've made to our employees and retirees increases significantly over the next 10 years. In our estimation, about 78% of this $235 million will be paid out over the next 10 years in the form of a benefit. That is a big contribution, or that is a big part of the reason why we're making contributions into the plan on a regular basis.
But then we're going to have decreasing obligations, right, Mr. Zuri, after 10 years?
That's correct. That's
so
correct.
We're going to see it's going to peak at that point and then start to decline.
I don't want to step too far on our actuaries' toes, but the analysis that we've walked through in the retirement board meetings suggests that that's correct. Now that, in fact, is predicated on a number of assumptions, which we'll talk about in just a second. Part of those are return assumptions, investment return assumptions. Part of those are mortality assumptions. So we won't know for sure until we actually experience it. But as far as the actuary is concerned, yeah, that is in fact looks to be the case.
Okay, thank you.
If head count is down in the county, what's driving up the cost over the next 10 years that you're going to be paying out 78%. You know, I mean, I haven't seen a raise. I don't think you've given a county retiree a raise.
The retirement board has not since 2008.
2008, right? So there's been no raises. So there's no COLA adjustments at all. So what is driving that increase?
So I need to be careful that I don't step on the actuary's toes, but I will say that when we look at pension plan management and how it worked successfully before, was you had a number of active lives working and contributing to the pension plan, and they were in fact satisfying the retired lives. Now it actually hurts us because there aren't as many active lives in the pension plan, paying into the pension plan, supporting the retired lives. So it's actually, if you think of it as a pyramid, early on when you have a robust workforce, they're paying into the pension plan and you have fewer retirees. Now people are retiring and getting older and collecting benefit. It's terrific that you're controlling costs from a budgetary perspective. However, there are just fewer employees at this point paying into the plan.
But those employees that are paying into the plan now are making significantly more money now than the employees were making before. I mean, there's been quite a few pay raises since 2008, over the last 10 years in the county. So even though the employees are down, I think the amount of money going into the fund is still significant.
Yeah, again, I don't feel comfortable. This is a question or an issue I don't feel comfortable addressing. I know that our actuary will be presenting at the July 18th board meeting, retirement board meeting. I'm sure he can answer these questions for you.
Mr. Urban, we're about less than 200 employees away from being equal to how many retirees we have. So we're almost to the point where we're equal.
And retirees are living longer.
I know, yeah.
So they keep collecting.
The longer they live, the bigger our problems are. Other questions, Mr. McGinley? Okay. There have been discussions about expectations. I mentioned a 70-some-odd% funded status presented in Harrisburg a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about funded status and comparing one county or one entity to another entity, and just looking at the funded status and determining what we can glean from that. And the reality is, the answer is not a lot, in our opinion. When we look at the funded status of Luzerne County, we've done a number of things right. We've been extraordinarily conservative about the way in which we're recognizing losses. We've been very conservative with the way in which we're anticipating future returns. While it's conservative, we would suggest that it's realistic, and we would suggest that we continue along along this path if we are going to make good, and we intend to make good on the promises that we're making to the employees and retirees. So as you know, one of the decisions that we've made recently, one of the recommendations was to reduce our expected rate of return as we look forward. Mr. Haas, the most recent actuarial report is based and predicated on a 7.25% rate of return on a forward-looking basis. That was reduced 2 years ago from 7.5%. Realistically, we think 7.25 is a little aggressive. We would like to see it somewhere in the neighborhood of somewhere in the 6s. We think is a realistic expectation as we look forward. There are consequences to that. One of the consequences is, and we've done the analysis with the actuary, is that every quarter point or quarter percentage point that we reduce our assumed rate of return, that's a $1.2 million increase per year into the pension plan.
The tax
1.2, you said?
1.2 approximately. That's correct.
Yeah.
So the question that I had, and the question we posed to our actuary, is what's worse? Is if we assume a higher rate of return, we kept it at 7.5%, and we all sort of wink to each other and know that it's going to come in at 6.5%. Why can't we just do that and take our medicine as it happens? It hurts worse, and it costs the county more to overestimate and come in under, as opposed to just taking our medicine and saying we understand that we're in a lower return environment. We believe we're in a lower return environment, especially over the next 7 years. Realistically, over the next 7 years, we expect the equity markets to return about just north of 4% on a net basis, and that's out of equities. So what we're suggesting is that if we had 100% of the $239 million in U.S. equities we would still not hit our return bogeys. In addition to that, we expect that volatility levels will remain normal or will become more normalized. 2017 was an anomaly. We saw very little volatility. So if we have our return expectations in our numerator and volatility in our denominator, simply because our numerator came down, it's going to feel a heck of a lot worse. As I mentioned earlier, if the market's going to give it, we're going to get it. That's not the environment that we're in. Right now, we need to navigate, squeeze whatever we possibly can out of the equity markets, cut whatever costs, and Ricky could certainly address this, cut whatever costs or expenses we possibly can out of the markets. But when the market does fall, or if the market does pull back, we need to be mindful of controlling risk in the portfolio and never put us in a position where we reduce our funded status significantly. The county can't afford it. If you were to say to us or suggest to me in any way that the county had just a blank check that they could continue to plow money into the plan, my position on risk would be dramatically different than where it is today. But it's not. And so again, for as mindful as we are about earning return and earning a modicum of return that'll satisfy our actuary and get us to where we need to be from a funded status perspective, we're as concerned, if not more concerned, about controlling risk.
By lowering your expected rate of return, are you sending a message to your money managers and your investors that, you know, I don't have to work hard, I just have to work mediocre?
Sure. Great question. It's a fair question. The answer to that is absolutely not. In fact, it's the opposite. You're going to have to work harder. And quite frankly, we've seen a lot of competition introduced into the marketplace. Indexing, as an example, is being treated as a novelty. We don't treat it as such. As you know, from the very beginning, we've included index funds in the pension plan. Right now, it probably accounts for about $42 million of the $239 million. So it would be just the opposite. There's more competition from money managers about returns. If returns are going to be hard to come by and difficult to come by, there's much more competition. But at the same time also, there's a lot of fee competition. So where a money manager historically may have been able to charge 1%, it is rare that we see a money manager charging 1%. And if we do, we work for a big firm, and we use Morgan Stanley's $2 trillion in assets to negotiate that lower. We are now signing, or have all of our money sign, a most favored nation clause. So whatever they charge Luzerne County, they cannot charge any other client a fee lower than what they're charging us. So we're being a little bit more creative. There's a heck of a lot more competition. I think in this kind of an environment, money managers get figured out pretty quickly. Look, when the market's up 19 or 20%, you could fake it and get away with it. Mm-hmm. You could charge fees that don't necessarily justify or aren't necessarily justifiable. But if my return expectations out of the equity markets are reduced down to 4%, and I'm paying a money manager 1%, I'm taking 25% of what we're earning. Again, if you're making 10%, that's not so bad. It doesn't feel good, but it's not as bad. But it's quite punitive when your return expectations are reduced to 4%, and now you have a money manager friction cost to the tune of 1%.
Is it strictly commission-based, how we pay our fund managers?
Absolutely not. It's done on an advisory basis. So the way in which you compensate us and the way you compensate our money managers, or we compensate our money managers, is based on an asset-based fee, so assets under management. So in this example, the 1% example, we have a money manager with $1 million, or that we've allocated $1 million to. They will charge a fee of, again, to make the math easy, 1%. So they're incented to do the right thing. As their assets that they have under management grow, they give themselves a raise. So if they grow from $1 million to $2 million, they've given themselves a raise. They've now made $20,000 instead of $10,000.
That handout that I provided to you earlier also shows you about from 2009 going forward about our investment expenses, how much they were in 2009 and where they're at currently.
Mr. Haas, also to address your question, commissions do come up quite a bit. We encourage our money managers to trade on Morgan Stanley's trading desk. We don't charge for commissions for these money managers. Really what you see is what you get, and there's no other fees, no other hidden fees or anything like that. So
Segment has a question.
Ms. Saban.
Okay.
Mr. Zuri, cutting costs, you had said, where do you see the ability to cut costs?
Sure. A couple of places. We've tried to lead by example. As Mr. Urban knows, when we came in, we cut our fee initially. We did it again in 2015. We have pressured our money managers and negotiated with our money managers. So if you go back to tab 2, you see all the money managers in our stable. We negotiate with them on your behalf and have them lower their fee. In some asset classes, it just doesn't make sense to use an active manager. So rather than pay someone, again, to use the extreme example, 1%, we could use an index fund that charges 0.09%. And then we've used, Ricky's been successful in reducing administrative costs. The actuary, the auditors. We've also engaged within a foreign tax reclamation program where if our international managers pay, might own BMW as an example, BMW pays a dividend. It shouldn't be taxable to us, it's taxed in Germany. So we've retained a firm that'll go out and collect the tax dollars that are owed to us. It's an extra $30,000 to $50,000 in any given year. It's money in the couch cushions. But look, if it's there, we're gonna get it, and we're gonna continue to put pressure in controlling costs.
My other question is, when did you have your pension? When did you do these? You make these estimates? Because if you're looking at the equity market now, I mean, yesterday was a disaster. The tariff situation, we don't really know what's going to happen till July. I mean, are we possibly looking at an even worse situation?
So good question. So we look at returns. We go through the exercise with our actuary on an annual basis, and we make our recommendations. The presentation we made together, our actuary and I made a presentation last month, and it was who's responsible for the decision and who's responsible for making the recommendation to move our assumption on a forward-looking basis. Greg said to me, the actuary said to me, well, what's the asset allocation? And I said to him, well, what return do you need me to get? And I'll tell you what the asset allocation is. So we had this sort of back and forth at a retirement board meeting. We look at the return assumptions on an annual basis. So this 7% reduction, we update our forward-looking expectations. We reduce it to 7% this year. But I think the question that you're getting to is, okay, do you sort of set it and forget it, if you will, until next year? And the answer to that is absolutely not. If you look at the investment policy statement and the way in which we crafted it, we have a strategic allocation, if you will. That's where we get the 55% equities, 35% fixed income, 20% alternative investments. The policy, it was decided that in the policy, we have a level of discretion where, for example, if we're not comfortable with the markets, we could deviate from that strategic allocation or that target allocation. So if I'm not comfortable going into July with the tariff situation, we have the ability to underweight equities. We have the ability to overweight equities within a certain band without having to come to a board, without having to ask for permission. Within that band, we could make those discretionary decisions. In between meetings as well, we have the ability to terminate relationships with our money managers. So for example, it has been the case historically where trade winds back, Mr. Urban, you probably remember this, back in 2009, they lost their key portfolio manager. It was the person responsible for all decisions in the portfolio. He took with him about 25 analysts with him. I did not have to come before the retirement board and say, hey, I've got an idea. He was responsible for the track record. He was the reason why we owned the mutual fund. It was an immediate termination. We went before the board at the next quarter and reported on the decisions that we made. So two levels of decisions that we're making. One's longer term in nature. Again, we're doing it on an annual basis. But again, in between those annual decisions about what to do with our forward-looking returns, we are making tactical decisions.
Do you think we're going to have to make big changes in our assets if the tariff situation comes about?
So the tariffs concern us, but it's a negotiation tactic, we feel. The thing that concerns us is not necessarily the tariffs, but where we are from a valuation perspective and what the implications can be. Stocks in the United States are not cheap. If you look at the construct of our portfolio today, we've owned more international stocks than we have in the past. We're getting closer to 50-50 with our U.S. stocks. Not because, or for one of the biggest reasons, because U.S. stocks are just expensive, and we do face some risks, tariffs, geopolitical risks. We would add to the list. So again, we want to be mindful of the risks that we have in front of us, and again, we're making tactical decisions along the way. But yes, to answer your question directly, it concerns us.
Anyone else?
One of my big concerns was that you had a lot of money sitting in bonds in the past.
Yeah.
You know, and would you say there was a target about 20%, and you had
Yeah.
about 35%. So I always thought you missed some equity, particularly last year when the markets were really doing really well.
So,
And the other thing, as I'm looking through some of the documentation, you have some Vanguard in there, but you have Vanguard International. And,
Correct.
I noticed Vanguard periodically goes to these county commissioner meetings, I think, or they invite people to seminars. Have you gone to Vanguard seminar and looked at some of their other particular assets that they have and other funds that they have, because some of their funds are doing extremely well.
Sure.
So, like way up there,
Sure.
15,
So-
12%. So.
I'll address the first issue about fixed income, and then maybe address the second issue about Vanguard and all index funds. If I look at the 10-year Treasury, and we'll use that as a gauge of the benchmark, or excuse me, of the fixed income benchmark, 10-year Treasury right now is yielding about 2.9%. So if I were to do, and getting back to our lower return expectations, if I were to do some back-of-the-envelope math, if I had a 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio, and the 40% that's in my bonds is returning 2.9%, it would suggest that the 60% that I have in risk-based assets, or I have in equities, let's just call it, would have to return just about 10% in order for me to hit my 7% bogey, okay? So you're correct. At this point, with a 10-year yield at 2.9%, bonds aren't attractive. But getting back to the point that was made earlier about controlling risk, and I have a graph in here that I'm happy to spend some time with you on. You know, I would make the argument, in hindsight, bonds were never a safe asset class. Okay, bonds were just a cheap asset class, and because they were cheap, it made them safe. As I look at bonds now, 2.9%, even if we didn't have a change in interest rates, 2.9% doesn't get us to where we need to be. It doesn't help us fulfill that promise. And so the dilemma that we're facing, the dilemma that I'm facing, is how do we continue to control risk in the portfolio if bonds are no longer a safe asset class? As you know, when you were on the board when we did it, we expanded the investment policy statement to accommodate alternative investments, hedge funds. We just introduced private equity into the portfolio. We will have to invest in instruments like that that will get us closer to where we need to be from a return perspective, but doesn't expose us to too much risk, particularly too much equity risk. I don't want to go lower. I want to very deliberately and very methodically chip away at the funded status and get us closer to 100. That's the goal. Getting back to your comment about Vanguard, I would say that all index funds have done extraordinarily well. You could pick on Vanguard, you could pick on iShares. We work with them all, we know them all. As a matter of policy, we do not go to conferences just so in any way it can be interpreted that we're conflicted. But we do the analysis, we do the due diligence. We rely on Morgan Stanley's infrastructure to help us with that, with those exercises. If I look back post-global financial crisis, I would say that structurally the markets have changed, and more investors are looking to index funds to generate returns in portfolios. They're cheap, they're effective, they're efficient, and they have done the job. However, when I look forward, or as I'm looking forward, and getting back to the comment that I made about the equity markets, you get what the market gives you. So whether it's a Vanguard or an iShares S&P 500 fund, 4% is the number we believe out of the equity markets. Now, we can argue, is it 4% or is it 3.5% or is it 4.5%? I think the spirit of the message is that the returns going forward are going to be much lower than they've been historically. And I think that returns are going to be much lower than our longer term expectations were, which are somewhere in the neighborhood of about 9%. So to answer the other dilemma that I have, and the other thing that we think about, is I said earlier that, you know, we're very conscious of fees and what we're paying our money managers. So in this environment, it makes sense to add more index funds to your point, because they're less expensive, less friction, and, you know, it works. At least we're getting closer to 4%. You know, but at the same time, if I pay a little bit more, maybe I have the ability to earn that more than 4% or get myself closer to my 7% return expectation. So when we look at the portfolio construct, what I believe we will see from a fee perspective, to get to your question, is we will see more, at least this level of index funds, if not more, in efficient asset classes. You know, we own Vanguard, you pointed out. We have the S&P 600, the small cap index. We have the SPY, the S&P 500 from iShares. I see a barbelled approach where we've got really cheap, efficient asset classes where we just want access. And on the other end of the barbell, we've got hedge funds. I mean, look, we own a number of hedge funds. You know, as an example, Golden Tree is a distressed, or I should say a private credit fund that we own. They're up about 5.5% in a market that's flattish this year. I like that, but what I like more is that the returns in the portfolio aren't being generated because the market is up. They're being generated because of some other thing. They're more idiosyncratic in nature. But that costs more. That costs us 2 and 20. So I'll mute that 2 and 20, that large fee, by adding more index funds in the portfolio. And our expectation is that we'll bring in costs right around the same level. Again, trying to get us to that 7% return objective. Does that answer your question?
We've always been good with trying to bring down fees. I know that was the reason for going out and reorganizing the board in the first place, because of the outrageous fees that were being paid out in 2001, 2002. I mean, they were.
We're down about 80% since 2008 when I came on.
Yeah, you did a good job.
Yeah, and then the investment expense is down almost 50%, and they're still we're hammering away.
And to the credit of the boards that we've worked with, you know, the question that we typically get when we go in front of a board is, what do you charge? You know, the real question is, and I think what everybody's been addressing is, what does the whole enchilada cost us if we choose you as our provider? And we've been very focused again on making sure that all aspects are addressed. The actuary, the auditors, us, our money managers, and we'll continue to do that.
One of the major other factors is, I don't know if you remember, Steve, we reduced the 5.5 interest rate towards down to 4%. That's 8 years ago.
Right.
We're currently $12.8 million we saved on the ARC.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's another big savings that we did. Yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Obviously, you've given us a lot of information, and I know that when you meet with the retirement board, there's always more information there people can gather. So I know there's a meeting in July.
Our next meeting is July 18th.
July 18th.
Everybody's invited.
Everyone's invited.
What's your secret? You haven't aged a day since 2008.
Thank you again for your work.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Sweats?
Good luck, Mr. Hummer.
Thank you. I have the reports in front of me that were sent out, the accounts payable report, the bank accounts. I do have the information on the budget report, which I'll give at the end after we go over the accounts payable or the treasurer's report, but I'll just do the summary report first, and then I'll take any questions. So that's on it's after the individual accounts payable report. It's on page 13 in your council packet. So you'll see the first line, the taxes line. If you recall, August 1st is the date for Hazel, and we made some of that up. I said I thought we would make it up. You could see last year, we always have the prior year-to-date column in the corner. So last year we're at 97 million, we're up to 94.5. Their discount won't end until August 1st. We get the money on the 10th of the month, so by August 10th, we should be caught up. At one point that was over $6 million. So we've been monitoring that, and the money has been coming in from Hazel Township. If you look at some of the other lines, the fees lines, the rent line, a lot of the revenue lines are mostly the same, are a little under on reimbursement, so I will look into that. as council and the public knows, we'll be coming up on the mid-year report. So we'll be doing a lot of analysis and detail as we get ready for the mid-year report. But overall, very similar to last time. If you look at the some of the other things, nothing's really crazy. You'll see that capital assets is at 55%, so a little bit over 50, and realizing this is May, and that was primarily the vehicles that were put in. Capital assets is the things, assets, machinery and equipment over 5,000, primarily vehicles during the budget process. So some of those were bought earlier in the budget season. We should be somewhere around low to mid 40s, and we are in pretty much all the expense line items. So if anyone has any questions on the, as I said, I have the accounts payable report and I have the cash report, treasurer's report with me.
Questions from Mr. Sweats?
So on the revenue lines, they're almost all down. The only ones that are up are rents, which is $14,000, and interest, which is $400. That doesn't help a lot. How much more in taxes do you expect to come in?
For taxes, last year, if you remember, for 2016 was the first year we actually made the budget number, and taxes is the prior year number and the current year number. I do anticipate that we'll be close to that. So by the end of the year, we should be at the number of the 118. It's more of a timing issue that more comes in earlier. So by June, we'll probably be somewhere around 85, 86%.
Right. So looking at the year-to-dates, from year-to-date transaction to the prior year-to-date transaction, we're still down 2.5 million.
Right, and that's
is that all accounted for in Hazel Township?
That's primarily Hazel. That was it was over 6 million just in the discount period of Hazel Township. They're just either the biggest or the second biggest in Wilkes-Barre City municipality. Yes.
Okay. And then in the expense lines, most of the expenses are higher than they were in the prior year to date. So your personnel costs are up 2.7 million over the year to date for last year.
Correct.
So
but if you
expect it to be about 6 million more this year in personnel costs?
We did have some increases in personnel costs. If you look at the budget, and I realize the year-to-date totals there, and it is important for the prior year, but at the budget and personnel costs, we're at 36%. So you're correct in that we're up. There were some changes made to the personnel costs during the budget process. I believe in CNY and some of the other departments, we filled some open positions. There's probably less vacant positions than in the past. So yes, you are correct that it's up, but at this point, at 36% at the end of May, I think we're okay. But as I said before, we'll have a full detailed report, and we've been starting on it because I know it's late. It comes out in August, and they're the numbers for mid-year. But we've already started digging in and getting the information ready for the detailed mid-year report.
Okay, and the only other thing I would like to say about this is that the debt service is down 1.3 million as an expense, and I think that's a wonderful thing to see that we're saving that much money because of the refinancing.
Yep.
Was the ARC payment paid?
We paid a quarter of the ARC payment, so we paid like 2.5 million. We had talked about paying by quarters, or if possible, paying half now towards the end of June. So we paid 2.5 towards the 13 million. We're looking at paying more. The one thing that's on our plate is, and it's already scheduled, is we have the tram payment this Friday. So we have to make the payment back and the interest. So we'll look at that. We'll schedule out the payrolls for the remaining 13 payrolls. And if we can pay another 2.5 or 5 million, we'll be doing that. So we'll definitely be making something. I'm not sure of the exact amount until we get those two numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Number 2, the Multimodal Transportation Fund grant. I don't see Mr. O'Neill or Mr. Plesh. Is there someone who's going to? Mr. Ferry?
I can address it. This had been a grant filed through Michelle, grant writer, looking for funding for some of the county road in Hanover Township. The grant was looking to put some bus stops up, and put pavements along the main road that goes by Chewy.com and all the way through the park. That's the focus of that. And it's through the end of this month, you know, why they're looking for some action.
Any questions, Mr. Ferry? If not, this will be on our next voting session. Number 3, discussion regarding authorizing county manager to execute a renewal contract for the Thomas Reuters Westlaw Legal Research Software. Mr. Greenwald.
My Westlaw contract is up the end of November, and it's time for renewal. I got a phone call from actually a new rep. I know I might be a bit early in the game, but there was some attractive pricing available, so kind of jumped on it.
And the only reason this is up is because it's a multi-year contract. We already have money in the budget for this year, correct?
Yes.
So because it's a multi-year contract, council has to approve that budget item. Any questions for Mr. Greenwald?
How much are you saving on it, Mr. Greenwald? You said you jumped on a pretty good offer. What savings
I
do you
was
expect
told
to realize?
that Thomson Reuters was changing their pricing in September, and that the plan that I currently use would no longer be available. So I really like the plan that we're using, and I wanted to keep, as much of the pricing as close as I could to what we're paying now.
So that's a slight increase. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Number 4, discussion resolution authorizing county manager to execute a lease agreement between Luzerne, Wyoming County's Area Agency on Aging and Susquehanna Properties Management for the Dallas Active Adult Center. Ms. Corcoran, you want to speak to this?
Well, this has been a contract that we've been had with the Susquehanna County Properties Management for the Dallas Active Adult Center. It's renewal. Basically, it's not a new entity that we're going to be renting. It's just a continuation of a active adult center that we're using right now.
I guess is it Twin Stacks? I think that's what the property is.
Correct.
Correct. Questions for Ms. Corcoran? Okay, hearing none. Move down 5. We've already had that information. And number 6. This is in regards to authorize the county manager to execute a sale of county-owned property by auction, and I think the real estate committee discussed this last
Yes,
meeting.
this was the subject of our last meeting in council. You have maps in front of you beginning on page 53 up to including page 111. Now, the original list, I believe, were 60 properties, and the list actually begins on page 54 and continues on the top of page 55. Most of these are vacant land. There are a few structures. As an example, I drove by, I was curious about Rice Township, I'm sorry. I drove by, I looked at the map, and indeed, there is a structure as the map shows. However, when at the last real estate meeting, we had a lively discussion with Mr. Pedri, Manager Pedri, about this, and I suggested that they take another look at this property in particular, because it appears that the lines may not be absolutely positively correct. There is a structure, I'd call it a barn, I'm not sure what it is, and it looks fairly new, and so there may be more there than meets the eye. But if you look at the other properties, they're clearly mapped. As I say, some of them are in between other properties. It's interesting because there were 2 properties in, I think, Lake Township, and at the suggestion, I think, of Mr. Schnee,
it was decided to remove those and do a little bit more research and perhaps an appraisal done on them. And what I think Mr. Pedri has done with our list is actually attached to original deeds when the properties were actually acquired by the county, going back to, I don't know, if it was the 50s or the 60s. And it appears that there has to be a little bit more research to find the exact location of those two properties. It's a bit nebulous at this point. So that's why they've been pulled from the list for further discussion, along with a house and a property in Hazel Township. You might have read about it in the newspaper. It appears that this property has been lived in by generations of the family. And the property is also owned by the county. And so we suggested that there be discussion between the county and the current property owner to see if they can purchase the property without it having to go to auction, which seems to the committee to be the fair thing to do in that circumstance. There was also another property that's been pulled, and it is adjacent to Fox Hill, the golf course, and that bears further scrutiny as well. So there are, and I don't want you to think these are the only properties owned by the county, which can be sold. There are many others. However, it's a matter of tracking down more information. Sometimes there are, in many instances, there are no deeds. So research has to be done on many other properties. I see this, and I think the committee sees this as an opportunity to have an auction and get some money for these properties, because these are properties the county has no intended use for, that perhaps the neighbors would be interested in, or other people in the community.
Jane, I'm looking at a lot of these maps. It looks like a lot of these don't have any egress even. It looks
Exactly.
like they're enclaves.
There may be, it may be, yes.
Property. I like that approach, talking to the neighboring property owners first.
Exactly. In some instances, and I have no reason to, I have no proof, but I'm thinking maybe Lake Township, that's the case as well. There's no way to access the property. I may be totally off base, but just looking at the original map, that's what it appeared to be to me.
Well, thanks for cleaning up this.
Well, I mean, I'm just the squeaky wheel here.
Yeah.
That's all I've been throughout this whole process, is the squeaky wheel. And thanks to our wonderful real estate committee, things are finally beginning to move along here. And as long as we keep asking questions and urging the manager to keep doing what he's doing, and the wonderful people in our mapping department who are really leading the charge on this, I think we're shortly going to have revenue coming into the county. This has been hard work. It's been hard work all along. The committee's been doing excellent work, and we've had wonderful cooperation from county employees, so I thank them very much for that as well. So that's where we are right now.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, I just want to say to thank Jane and her committee, because these maps are really very good and give us a very good idea of these properties that are out there. Some of them do have ingress and egress, some of them don't. I mean, but I think they're the best maps we've ever had of anything. Really explains a lot. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay, moving down to number 7. Ms. Howe?
Okay, so the Code Review Committee has been meeting, and I thank Mr. Kelleher and Mr. McGinley for meeting in my absence on June 5th, at which time we were to review what we had looked at with the Personnel Code. So what you have beginning on page 112 is the Personnel Code with the proposed changes, which there are not many. We had quite a bit of discussion on some of the things, just to make sure with county HR and administration, to make sure that some of the things are working out as they're spelled out in the personnel code, and just to check with them about a couple items that we had questions about. But I believe the only changes are close to the end. Page 123, and these were suggestions to remove the language from the original version of the personnel code, which talked about as soon as reasonably possible after the effective date. So the effective date was back in 2012, and clearly we don't need that language anymore. So there are a couple changes up at the top of 123, a change at the bottom of 123, and then a change on page 125 of the agenda. Was there anything else, gentlemen, that was discussed in my absence?
We only had the other question about the promotion and returning to the position.
Right, so we had the question, and that was, I believe, on page 125. No, that wasn't reduction in personnel. No. It was, the question was, oh, I know, it's at the bottom of 120, of 126. And at this section, it's the probationary period, and the question was about the language at the top of 121 that says if at the, during, at the, or at the end of the probationary period, the newly hired, no, number 2, if the employee is not permanently promoted at the end of the probationary period, the person would be returned to their former position or an equivalent position. And so we had, that was constituted a lot of our discussion as to how that would work if someone were moved, you know, were promoted and then had to be put back into their former job, and it could have been, you know, there's a period of several months that would have passed, and how would that work? And the discussion with the management was that they don't really promote people. They basically treat it as a new hire if someone is moving to a different classification. But I believe, if I understand correctly, what your final discussion was on June 5th, it was that we weren't, or on June 12th, it was that we would not touch it because it was put in there, and if it doesn't apply, it doesn't hurt anybody anyway.
Right.
Right. So the decision was to leave it as it is. So with that said, if anybody else has any suggestions, we met several times, and I think we had 3 discussions on personnel code, and here we are, and we could move forward with this and you know, propose these amendments at the next voting session. But if anybody else has something they'd like to add, we could take it back to the committee if so.
So if there's any other further comment, you can send it to Ms. Houck, and we'll have it on the next voting session.
Right. Right.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Moving over to the back side there, number 8, council committees. Mr. Kelleher.
We're going to talk more about setting up a date for an interview session, but we want to make sure we set up a date. Excuse my voice. We set up a date that we have enough people there to make the interview session worthwhile. At this point, we're looking at, we might have about 3 or 4, but we're going to have to contact them and set up a date for a meeting before our next meeting. That's about it.
And of course, earlier this evening we had declared that vacancy, so you have 1 vacancy there.
We have 1 vacancy. We have a number of people on the list, but my thinking was that maybe we should try to set up a session so that if somebody wanted to be on that board, at least they're given the opportunity, and they can't say, well, I wish I had known that there was an opening and I could interview. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow and try to set up a meeting.
Thank you. Budget, finance, and audit. Of course, you know that we've been working on the audit. Obviously, we still are very much aware that children and youth have a problem with their audit, and the field work was pretty much completed, Mr. Sweats, right? You want to come up? And until that is finalized, the children and youth audit, we cannot complete the county audit. We've been getting weekly updates, and Mr. Sweats, you want to go from there?
Sure. So on children and youth was back on site last week. They were meeting with staff to go over information for the audit. The information was ready when they got there, which was great. They were going through and they still had some discrepancies to figure out if they needed journal entries or reports amended. So they've been working through that. They're off-site now, but they are still working. I've got emails yesterday and today with information that went to Lynn and Joanne and the CMY staff. I'm CC'd on anything. So they're still actively working on the information that was ready last week and working to close that out. I hope to have another update on Friday. If not, it would be on Monday. But they were there, they got information, they're going through it, and if there's any issues, I'll let everyone know.
And you want to comment on the current status of the county audit then?
Sure. So the draft audit was given to the audit committee this afternoon. The draft audit we did review. We looked at the general fund and obviously the reports that were issued. So every report, as you mentioned, besides children and youth, any entries that were made on the county side were made. The preliminary general fund number was about $7.9 million. Great number, almost wipes out the deficit. I will take some caution in that, though, saying it is the draft number. There could be a big swing with children and youth. So until children and youth is done and we can have a final report, that is what we have. The two big issues really driving that number, and we've talked about them during the budget hearings, was obviously the Lackawanna baseball settlement we had last year and the refinancing. So when you put those two numbers in there, they make up most of the surplus, and the day-to-day operations with transfers to the agencies was pretty close to on par. We'll still have entries to make as we get children and youth. So the auditors will be here when the final audit's ready. I would assume they'll have not just the report, but some sort of PowerPoint, some sort of slideshow. Management will provide the full management discussion, those 10 or 11 pages that myself and my team prepares with the final audit. So we've moved and done everything we could with the final audits that we had, made all the entries on the management side. We'll be posting the draft to the Emma site. So if you remember, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, you know, when we first went out for the first refinancing, we didn't have anything posted, and we had to work with PFM to post all the prior audits. So you do have to post any of the numbers of the draft audit. When you expect to have an audit and have information ready for investors, you can't just leave nothing. So myself and my team will be doing that in the next day or two. We won't wait until the 29th. So that'll be online. And once we get the final audit, we'll be ready to update the management discussion analysis and everything on that website. It was kind of Clifton Larson Allen and the county administration. And it was even talked about at the last budget meeting to do this once at this point in the game, to not put together management discussion and analysis on June 26 and then potentially have to revise it for a final. So the idea was get the draft out, we tied out the numbers of the draft with the reports that were issued, and get all the other information done once. And that's where we're headed.
Again, I will caution that, you know, draft numbers are draft numbers. Children and Youth is a rather large agency with a rather large budget, so it can have dramatic effects on the final budget report.
Yes, Children and Youth is about a $40 million budget, and if you remember, I believe it was 2 years ago, that there was about a $1.4 million difference between the draft and the final audit. So again, everything that we have was tied out to the final reports, and we're waiting to work with Children and Youth. And once we get some more information, we'll have a tentative date and get Clifton Larson Allen up here with the slideshow and the final audit. And we'll still be doing the weekly updates on where we stand with children and youth.
Questions? Thank you. Mr. Haas.
Yeah, Legislative Committee met. We met with our second representative, Representative Coffer, just last week, and it was a very productive meeting, just like it was with Representative Paszynski a few weeks earlier. Everybody knows the state passed the budget, and good for them passing it on time. That's something to celebrate. It's hard for me not to be cynical, however, just because the counties just don't seem to be a priority in the budget. Again, if you've read the report in your CCAP thing too, they said they basically flatlined a lot of our expenditures, which is fine. We still have that $250,000 cut we received 2 years ago, 2 budget cycles ago, with the MDJs, and we lobbied for that, and that was not in our favor this time. Maybe we'll try again next year, and we'll get that cut restored with Harrisburg. We're going to meet Legislative Committee again Tuesday, July 10th at 5 p.m. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Wickes.
Well, I gave basically our report about what we did at our last meeting, and we continue to work on the list of properties. That's our main focus for every meeting in the very near future. So we will set up another meeting. But if I could just have a minute to give a brief report about something that affects real estate, and that's the gypsy moth liaison position. Eddie O'Neill and I met at Wright Township with some representatives from Wright Township. We had a very good meeting. We came up with an action plan. We're meeting again on July 12th, and you're certainly invited to join us, Council, if you're so inclined. We're meeting at 10 a.m. with actually some folks from Harrisburg. Don Egan from who's our Forest Health Manager, Tim Marasco, Field Operations Supervisor, and actually they're bringing with them Scott Steitzer, who's actually the state's forest health, one of the state's forest health specialists, and this is from the Department of Natural Resources. They're very interested in Luzerne County, as it turns out. Who knew? But they are. They're very interested. They would like to help us come up with a plan to take care of gypsy moths, not only next year, but into the future. They are thrilled to be making the trip. They want to talk about other potential funding methods for us, and they would like to know what we're thinking so they can define their geographic scope a little bit more. And it's all good. It's all wonderful. We're very excited about it. So that's the latest about gypsy moths.
And you mean here, Jane, on the 10th?
No, we're going to be at Wright Township at the Municipal Building, July 12th, 10 a.m., 10 to 12. So we're going to have a conference room large enough. We're hoping to hold around 12 people. So if you're interested, why don't you just send me an email, and and I'll make sure the room is large enough.
Thanks for taking leadership on this one. That's fantastic.
It's my pleasure, and the folks from Wright Township have been marvelous to work with. As Eddie O'Neill, he's a wonderful gold mine of information. So now we've got the state involved, so it's going to be great, right?
Get rid of my sentences.
Yes.
Thank you for your work on that. That's important. Ms. Hauk, strategic initiatives?
Strategic initiatives, we met in May, and we discussed the high-performing organizations. And Mr. Pedri did send me some things, so we'll have something to discuss at our next meeting. And I don't have the date written down for that right here. Do
I
you
don't
remember
have it.
what is,
I'll look. I don't think I wrote it.
It's July 10th.
July 10th.
July 10th.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So at our July 10th meeting, we'll talk about at 5. Right. Okay. So that's what we'll be talking about.
Okay.
The high-performing government organizations.
Very good. Code review, Ms. Hauk?
Okay, so, well, the personnel code we talked about before, and again, I thank you gentlemen for conducting the meeting in my absence, but it's also my understanding that you changed the format of where we're going next. So we had I had planned to tackle the ethics code next, but it's my understanding you've decided we're going to do the administrative code next.
Well, we thought with the ethics group just getting together formally, we can give them a little time and hopefully get some feedback from them.
Okay, I just want to confirm that with you. That's what I understand the discussion was. So we have to come up with the next meeting, and I don't know when we're going to do that. So it won't be July 10th, but
you might be able to at 4:30.
Well, it leaves half an hour. It's a pretty big, but maybe we could get a start on it. Do you want to try that for July 10th? Can we do 4:30 on July 10th?
I think
enough time maybe to get an idea where we're at.
Yeah, Act 13.
2 weeks.
Sorry, Lynn, I think, if I'm not,
doing something?
if not, Sharon, I think the Act 13 meeting is July
That's you. Okay,
10th to
so we won't do
4:30.
that. Let's try for the next.
5:30's open. 5:30's open that day too.
No, because then we'll have the meeting at 6.
5:30.
We were going to have a public hearing, but we don't.
Yeah, we don't need a public hearing, right?
No, we'll come up with a date. And
All right, look for a date
publicize it. Okay.
and we'll get it posted online.
Okay.
Harry, Did you say the legislative committee meeting was at 5 o'clock on July 10th?
5 o'clock on July 10th.
But I thought that, didn't they just say the
Yes.
strategic initiatives?
Strategic.
That's.
I think that's 5:30, right?
I think to 4. I don't have, my phone's not up to date with my computer in there.
But
I
ours
know
is
it's
at
on the
5.
schedule.
I think ours originally planned. We'll make it work, whatever works best for the group. But I think it was originally at 5 o'clock, if I'm mistaken.
Oh, we'll get,
Yeah.
and we'll get that schedule out on the
Which again,
10th.
it's a very brief meeting, so Ms. Lawrence help us out with that.
Okay.
We're just gonna have a little party.
Mr. Haas?
Yes, sir. I don't think anything's changed either since our last Act 13 meeting.
Okay.
We will meet Tuesday, July 10th at 4:30.
Tuesday, July
At thir-
10th, 4:30.
4:30 p.m. Yes, sir.
Mr. Haas again?
Blighted Property Review Committee, we're just meeting for the Redevelopment Authority to interface with the council and see how that pans out with a vote sometime probably in July. It looks like we are slated for Monday, July 30th at 5 p.m. here in council
Monday,
chambers.
July 30th at 5 p.m.
Obviously contingent on council action.
Okay. Riverfront Parks Committee, of course, the past weekend was the Riverfest. They did very well, I think, and they seem to have a lot of people who enjoyed the festivities. Had a little bit of weather on Sunday morning, but that worked out by the afternoon, so they were able to get all their activities in. So that's the report on that. The Plains TIF, Plains Township TIF, there's a meeting scheduled tomorrow. It would be the second meeting. We have not had a meeting since the very early meeting back in April. So I have not received the agenda. When I receive the agenda, I'll send it out to everyone. Ms. Hauk on the website?
The website, Mr. Parsons tells me that things have been pushed back with the website rollout to July 9th. And we expect to have a steering committee meeting before that. So that would leave next week for that. I don't have a date. I'm depending on Mr. Parsons to let me know.
That gets us down to number 10, which is the request from Ms. Hauk earlier.
Right, so if you look at, the budget report that we got tonight, which included several pages of accounts payable. Now, these are aged invoices, and probably they're all paid by now because that's as of the end of May. So although it's helpful to see where the money is going, that's not actually where all the money is going because it doesn't include the invoices that were actually paid. These are just the unpaid ones. So, I mean, I certainly don't mind seeing the accounts payable invoice report, but my issues with the budget and only having a classification report by account. So we're looking at, I don't know, like 80,000 feet from up in the air at, the overall picture of the revenues and the expenses. But in terms of seeing exactly how the budget we spent all that time deliberating on in October and November and December before we pass it, in terms of knowing how that budget is working and having some idea, I think you can see I had a couple questions tonight about just like what's the status of the reserve fund. If we had that at a division level report, and I would say, what do we have, like 17 divisions overall? If you had a straight report of here's the revenues in the division, here's the expenses, I don't want to see how many paper clips they bought. I just want to see, how is that division performing on a monthly basis? We're going to get a detailed report in the quarterly report, but in terms of knowing, like, say, what's the balance in the reserve fund, you can't find that out anywhere. If you look at, and Harry and I were talking about this before, if you look at the account balances, you might say, oh, well, I'll look for the reserve fund here, but you can't because it's in the general fund, which is, it's nice, it's $62 million, almost $63 million, but you don't know how that budget is working. So I've asked for it, and you've heard me ask for it several times in the last, I don't know, the last several months. Actually, I asked for it before the turn of the year, too, and I mean, I just think the only way that it's going to happen is if we take a vote. And if everybody wants to see a little bit more information than you're getting now, to have a little bit more information when a vote comes up, that's what I would ask you to support. So for the next voting meeting, I would like to have a resolution on it, and I'll draft something, make sure it's okay with the solicitor's office.
Mr. Sweats, can you come up to the podium, please? So currently in the month-to-month, you're giving us the report we see this evening, right? Correct?
Correct. So the budget performance report is what you're getting. Actually, the budget account classification report. I'm sorry. I had the budget performance report because I have your two answers, which I didn't give you before, but I have them here. But I understand the question.
But we voted before, that's my point.
I understand.
Right.
We could have asked questions before, too.
I did.
I know.
Okay.
You asked for the details.
You didn't have the answers.
Okay, let's, Mr. Sweats, please.
Sure. So as I said before, whatever a majority of council wants to do, I don't want to run 10 different reports is all I ask. I'm okay with any format, running it on the quarter, running it every month. It's a canned report, so it's not really that much work. It's more paper, but it's not really that much work. We'd go through and we get more detail.
Sounded like Ms. Houck was looking for a report that would give you the division reports, where they are currently versus what their budget is.
So we can do that. We can do a report that says, this is a division, this is, so basically a detailed, that 40-page report broken down by division. Is that fair estimation?
Well, it doesn't need to be a 40-page report. I mean,
right.
If you break it down, you're probably going to have 4 pages.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we're looking for that detailed 40 pages.
That's what I said. I don't want to know how many paper clips they bought.
Right.
What your office supplies line is.
I think if I could, Lynn, I mean, it's just like you done, Mr. Sweats, with the general budget. You got your master sheet there. I think Linda's asking that for the individual divisions.
So basically a summary sheet for all the divisions instead of just one for the general fund. It's like Division 10, Division 20, Division.
Well, there's nothing wrong with this. This is a different view of it, but I think in addition, it's much more helpful to be able to say, like I said, if I ask what's the balance of the reserve fund,
You don't have it right there.
it's not there.
I understand.
And then I have to ask you more questions. You have to go find the stuff. And,
Right.
How many divisions do we have?
Probably about 15, somewhere in that ballpark.
Okay.
Because there's 8 division heads and then some
Can
other.
you do a sample report of that nature and send it out so people would know what we're looking at?
Yeah, I can do that. I can have somebody draft something and send it to everyone before the next, like today or tomorrow.
Then we'll know what it looks like.
And then you could say, if that's meets your needs.
Sure.
And then that would help you draft a resolution.
Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's fine. And I realize you already voted, but I have them. Do you want them or you don't care? I have them. I printed them out. So hold on, give me 1 second here. I did print them out. The reserve fund before those votes today. So we started at 49,37461. A few meetings back, we approved 150,000 for ADP, which took it down to 47,87461. So we were at 4.7, and then we put back to almost 250 for the CCAP. So, and then we took 80 for Steve. I wasn't here. I went back downstairs. Did we approve the 80?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're looking at put up 170 on the 4.7. So a little less than 5 million. But I'll get you the exact total. But,
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'll put something together and we can go from there.
Yeah, send it out so that people can see that.
Yeah,
and
I can do that.
that's something we can use.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good.
Chairman,
Yes.
could I say something before we go to
Absolutely.
public comment? I'd like to address the travesty of the tornado that recently happened. And first of all, I'd like to thank God for keeping our citizens safe, our women, men, children safe from that. But I'd like to thank and how proud I am of every employee of Luzerne County that participated in, after the destruction, of keeping that place safe and people knowing what to do when something like that happens. Because, I mean, I looked at, as a comment, you wouldn't even know where to start. All right, so thank God we have people for that. I'd like to thank the utilities that kept people safe from people like getting hurt with lines down, gas was leaking. But we're gonna fight back. We've gone through adversity before in this county. I mean, this is a setback. It might be a small word for people, but I mean, people lost their businesses, they lost their jobs. But we're gonna be back. We've always fought back. We're gonna be back. Thank you.
Thank you. And you're right. The work that was done by several of our departments was really very good. The meeting they held last week to help those businesses and give them direction and offer assistance was very beneficial, and I think that's a role the county should assume. We're here to help people.
I drove by there Wednesday after work, and there were some national recovery businesses up there already fixing, Barnes & Noble and
Yep.
several of the businesses already. I mean, I guess they had their insurance adjusters out there already, and they're back to work. And the other thing is, if anybody was caught looting, I think they ought to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. No forgiveness.
Okay, public comment, please. Have a
Motion to adjourn, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Haas?
Second.
Mr. Saban? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
That's right. I met a friend of yours.